so much. I really like it when there's an evening with no football. And no zozobra tonight, but the start of our fiesta. And, we're very pleased that our Palace Guard is a membership organization of our Museum of New Mexico Foundation. So if you're a Palace Guard member, would you raise your hand? And you should thank the Palace Guard. If you're a member of Los Compadres, raise your hand. If you are or were a docent at this museum or the Palace of the Governors, raise your hand. If you teach New Mexico history, you get a gold star. We are so honored to be part of the annual fiesta. This is, as far as I know, about the 10th time that we have had the fiesta lecture here and at the Palace. We've only had it 3 times here. Oh, I see Don Diego de Vargas. You know, it's not every day that Don Diego de Vargas asks you where he can put his helmet. We are so pleased to have the cuadrilla here, to have Don Diego de Vargas, who's actually, Jason, you might as well keep standing. Jason Jaime Lucero, who is our Don Diego for this year. Do you want to introduce members of your cuadrilla?
Muchísimas gracias a todos por su invitaron esta noche. Yo soy Jesús Jaime Lucero, el Don Diego de las fiestas del 2013. Muchas gracias. Good evening, and thank you for your invitation this evening. My name is Jason Jaime Lucero, the 2013 Don Diego de Vargas of this year's Santa Fe Fiestas. It is an honor for myself to be portraying Don Diego de Vargas. Culturally, my heritage, and most of all, my religion. I want to go ahead and introduce a couple of my members for my cuadrilla that I can see that are here with me this evening. My Capitan Segundo, Frankie Nazario Lucero. It's an honor for myself to have my cousin be with me on this experience through the year. From what I was informed by him, is we're direct descendants of our Capitan Segundo, who he is portraying, Juan de Dios Lucero de Godoy. He also has 2 other brothers that are with him on the cuadrilla, which are serving as Carlos Mayor and another one of my soldados. A Native American cacique, James Naranjo. My Sargento Mayor, Nicolas Martinez. I thank all of you for being interested in Don Diego de Vargas, Zapata Lujan, Ponce de Leon, and Marquis de la Nava de Barcinas. He is a very great part of the Santa Fe Fiestas. Without his promise that he made to La Conquistadora to keep peace between the Spaniards and the Native Americans, we wouldn't have what we call today Las Fiestas de Santa Fe. With that promise, He also made a promise to have masses, processions, vespers, and sermons. Right now, we're going to be completing his promise by having our masses, which officially start our fiestas. I thank you again.
¡Que viva don Diego de Vargas!
¡Que viva! I'd also like to introduce the Reina of the Fiesta 2003, Christy Ojinaga Ibarego.
I won't keep you too long. I just want to introduce to you my princesas I have this year. First of all, Spanish Princesa Natasha Lovato. My baby sister, Spanish Princesa Camila Ojinaga Ibarego. And my cousin, Spanish Princesa Amanda Borrego. Thank you so much for having us here with you. We're really looking forward to this. Thank you.
¡Que viva las fiestas de Santa Fe! ¡Que viva!
Somehow my voice doesn't have quite that fuerza. I was thanking everyone who makes this museum such a success, our compadres, who are literally our compadres, our godparents who guide us in our programming throughout the years, who helped us with the fundraising to build this building and to sponsor our programs. And this program tonight is sponsored by the Palace Guard, a membership group of our Museum of New Mexico Foundation. We have about 187, I'm looking at Judy amounts here, 187 families who are part of the group, and it's their sponsorship that allow us to do these programs. I want to just tell you there's one thing coming up, and we'd love to have you join us. Even if you're not a Palace Guard member, we are taking a field trip on Saturday, September 28th, to the Bosque Redondo, to the Fort Sumner State Historic Site. And we would love to have you join us. If you're interested in that, Judy, where are you? Judy is way in the back there. If you are interested in the Bosque Redondo trip, there'll be people outside when we're doing book signing, and they'll be able to tell you about this. If you don't find what you need, please check the Museum of New Mexico Foundation website. Look under the special events, and you'll see what's in store for the day. It's going to be a really interesting trip. Where else in the United States do you get to touch history the way you do here? A trip to a historic site, meeting Don Diego de Vargas, meeting La Reina. I come from New England, although I lived there longer than I lived there. And I have to say that at Fiesta time, for me, it's always that story of our creation as a state, as a community, as a part of the Spanish heritage of New Mexico. Right now we have an exhibition upstairs in our second floor gallery that's a history of cowboys. And where did it all start? It started with the Hispanic settlement of the Southwest. How many of you have seen the cowboy show? Well, that's pretty good. Turn to the person next to you and tell them what they're missing. I hope that you'll come back. You're going to be free all weekend while you're downtown enjoying Fiesta, the Cowboys exhibit, and all of the Palace of the Governors where our history began, and every exhibit in this museum will be free. Please come in. Don't just use the bathroom. And come and see the exhibits and see the starting. I think that we are so fortunate to have the history that we do and to be in touch with it. On Friday, when you guys do the entrada, I drop everything on my desk and go out to watch it and think about what that was like. We are so fortunate that the Palace Guard sponsors this lecture every year, and I have to thank the Palace Guard Guard committee that worked on this: Blanche Harrison, Judy Wilson, Marion Kastner, Shirley Pisacani, Phil Laughlin. I know I'm missing someone. Okay, thank you. Thank you. And it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Rick Hendricks, who is our state historian. My husband and I are both historians, and Rick's name gets mentioned almost as many times in our house as our children. Almost as many times as we say Steve and Anna, we say Rick Hendricks. Well, I had lunch with Rick today. Well, I'm having breakfast with Rick. Rick is the consummate historian and generous historian. And he is never too busy to answer my question. He's never too busy to give a special tour. He's never too busy to do a lecture for us and to speak around the state. Rick is the former editor of the University of New Mexico Vargas Project. And if you have not had the pleasure of reading the Vargas Project, you can read 7 volumes of Don Diego de Vargas's letters, his letters to his children, his letters to his son-in-law, his helpful advice from half a world away to his son-in-law living in Spain while he was living in the palace of the governor. He wrote those letters back to his family. You can read his very words. Rick was one of the editors of that project. He transcribed, translated, and annotated the papers of Governor Vargas. Governor Vargas, who was known to his descendants in Spain as Señor Feo, he decided he's really not so ugly. And I don't want to hear any of you refer to this year's Don Diego as Señor Feo. Rick has me the opportunity to actually unfold those letters, sometimes for the first time in 400 years, or 300 and some odd years. I'm not good at math. He transcribed them, he translated it, he edited them. At the end of this, we do have books for sale that are Vargas's actual letters, not actually the translations and transcriptions. So those are upstairs for sale, and Rick will be signing books upstairs. When his lecture is over, if you would let him go upstairs and get a place to sign books, he'll answer a few questions here, and then let him go upstairs. I'm going to ask one of our Palace Guard members to escort him in case you rush it, or the quadrille. Rick has been a historical consultant to many pueblos in New Mexico, to Sandia, Santana, and Picuris, to Isleta del Sur in Texas. He has written or collaborated on, get this, 19 books and 90 articles. He doesn't much under that. Well, there it is. All in the Spanish colonial period. He has garnered awards from the Historical Society of New Mexico, the New Mexico Historical Review, El Paso County Historical Society, Regional Borderlands Library Association, the Doñana County Historical Society. He's a native of North Carolina, don't ask. He earned a doctorate in Iberian American Studies at UNM, and he attended the Universidad de Sevilla in Spain. He is a treasure to New Mexico, and we are so pleased to have him. I'm going to duck out soon after he starts speaking, and it's nothing he said. But tonight, for me, is the start of the Jewish holidays, and I'm going to leave to go pray for him. Thank you.
Sometimes when somebody makes a beautiful introduction like that, I feel like it's an obituary. It's an honor for me to be here. I spent the better part of 2 decades living with Don Diego de Vargas in every way you can imagine, walking in his footsteps, and to see these young folks that come out every year and spend a whole year performing community service and learning about their history and their culture. it makes me feel like it's all worthwhile to have spent that much time doing it. I'm sure you'll all want to purchase all 7 volumes, and if so, you'll know everything that I'm going to tell you today. But what the topic for tonight is Vargas's 2 families. Last year I spoke about Vargas and God-parenthood and his relationship with Native Americans, and a lot of the questions were about his own family, and so when I was asked to speak again this year, that seemed like an obvious topic. When I think of the Vargas family, I always think of Madrid. Madrid, the capital of Spain, is really inseparable from the Vargas family. For centuries before Diego de Vargas was born, the Vargas family was prominent in Madrid. San Isidro Labrador, St. Isidore the Saint, worked for Ivan de Vargas outside of Madrid. So the story of the Vargases in Madrid is intertwined, and we know that Vargas felt like Madrid was the jewel of Europe. It was the only city that he really considered could be a royal court. We know that he considered New Mexico remote beyond compare. By contrast, when Vargas lived there, if we look at Madrid in the middle of the 17th century, it's nothing like the gleaming modern city. If you've had an opportunity to visit Madrid today, if you haven't, I certainly recommend it. The city is nothing like what Vargas lived. When he lived in about the middle of the 17th century, Madrid probably had a population of 125,000. It was considered to be the filthiest city in Europe. He never had a chance to go to London, which was 5 times the size of Madrid, or Paris, which was 4 times the size of Madrid. But he always considered it to be his home. His father was Alonso de Vargas, and his mother was Maria Margarita Contreras y Arraiz. They also lived most of the time there. Vargas was not the firstborn son. He had an older brother named Lorenzo. He was a sickly child. And as this year's Don Diego correctly said, Vargas tended to sport the names Diego de Vargas Zapata Luján Ponce de León. He also had Jose thrown in there when he was baptized, but he never used it in life. And he often used Y Contreras, which was one of his mother's name. But typically he signed his name Diego de Vargas Zapata Luján Ponce de León. It's quite a mouthful. He also had a sister, Antonia de Vargas Zapata Luján was the series of names that she used. Now the family, in addition, the family seat, if you will, was in Madrid. But about 30 miles north of Madrid, there's a delightful town, Torre Laguna, Tower of the Lake. And that was where the Vargas family had their summer home. It was a 16th century stone mansion. It was on a small plaza. The plaza is called a pozo. We normally think of a large plaza. This is a very small plaza. It was a walled medieval town, and it was in the valley of the Rio Jarama. It's cooler. It's a delightful place to leave Madrid and go to, and that was where Vargas tended to spend his summer. Now, just next door to the Vargas home was the home of the Pimentel family. It was a family of soldiers, bureaucrats, and diplomats that also had a long history and a distinguished history in Spain. One of the daughters of the family, who was just a few years older than Diego, was Beatriz Pimentel de Prado Vélez de Orizaba. And they grew up together, and they spent their summers together, and love blossomed. Now, we think of the 17th century, we think of a lot of arranged marriages, but this was clearly a romantic love. They agreed to wed on the 1st of April, 1664. Vargas pledged 4,000 ducados, which represented 1/4 of his wealth, so it was his personal estate would have been fairly considerable. She was 22 years old and he was 20. Married an older woman. They were married in the towering Gothic church of Santa Maria Magdalena on the 5th of May, 1664. And if you ever have the opportunity to travel to Torre Laguna, I highly recommend it. You can still go in the church. You can walk in Vargas's footsteps. Now, just a little over 9 months after they got married, they had their first child, Isabel Maria. Then followed Juana Viviana, Maria Antonia, Francisco Alonso, Francisco Ivan, and Juan Manuel in fairly quick succession. Vargas's mother had died when Vargas was only 5 years old, and his father had gone to the Indies as his father had done. So a tradition had already been established in the Vargas family of service in the Indies. He was a young widower, and he went out to what is today Guatemala. He was a young man still. He was in his 20s when he left. And around 1659, he arranged to marry again. So when I'm talking about Vargas's two families, his two families are quite complicated. His Old World family has a New World branch, and that comes from this second marriage. The remarriage was to a woman. She was what we call a criolla. She was born of Spanish parents in the Indies, and she was very wealthy, and I imagine she was quite beautiful. Her name was Jerónima de Guinea y Murga. People in her family had been governors of Guatemala. They had 3 sons: Pedro Alonso de Vargas Lujan, Francisco de Vargas Lujan, and Antonio de Vargas Lujan. So these children were Vargas's half-siblings. Okay. Alonso died in 1665. This made Diego de Vargas the head of his father's estates because his older brother Lorenzo had predeceased him. So, in Vargas's father's will, Diego de Vargas inherited the properties in Spain. And like many people in 17th century Europe, they were land rich and money poor. Almost everything that he inherited was heavily encumbered. He had properties in Madrid. He had the family home there. They had the summer properties in Torre Laguna. And he had what were called the cortijos, the small farms. One was called Barcinas, and one was called La Nava, and they were north of Granada in southern Spain. Now, Don Diego mentioned that eventually Vargas gets the title Marqués de la Nava de Barcinas. But Diego got confused, separated from his homeland, and he switched it and they made it Bracinas. So every time he wrote his name, he was the Conde de Bracinas, which is a place that doesn't exist. But he still had his title. Now, he and his 3 half-siblings inherited $10,000 and 10,000 pesos in cash to divide, and a like amount in wrought silver, valuables, slaves, and other items. And this was available to them, and it was in Guatemala. The stepmother's brother, and I'll tell you this gets a little complicated. Vargas's step-uncle was a Jesuit. And he sought a worthy husband for his young sister, this wealthy widow. And he wrote to the Vargas family in Spain and said, I wonder if there is a suitable member of the Vargas family who would like to come out here and marry. Well, now, we don't think that Vargas himself, Diego de Vargas, had this idea in mind, but we know that in 1672 he departed for the Indies and he was headed for Guatemala. So what we assume was that he was going to settle his father's estate. He probably wanted to take a look at his stepmother just to see if someone in his family might be a suitable husband for her. It wouldn't have been possible for him to do it without a dispensation from the Pope, which I don't believe he would have received. But at any rate, he probably wanted to look her over. He carried with him a royal cedula that was a recommendation to him to the Viceroy of New Spain and to the President of the Audiencia of Guatemala to find some job for him. And he had a little job as royal courier to the Viceroy. So there's no indication that Diego de Vargas was going to the Indies with the idea of pursuing a career there. It's much more likely that his initial idea was that he would go and he would settle his father's considerable estate. Now, the family he left in Spain, included his oldest child, Isabel Maria, who was 7. Juan Manuel was the youngest, and he was only 20 months old. So Vargas is leaving. He's leaving his wife and his children. He's leaving the family in the care of his brother-in-law, Gregorio Pimentel de Prado, and other relatives. Now, in the early years, when he arrived and he took his little piece of mail to the viceroy, that was the viceroy, the Marqués de Mancera, and he named Vargas to a post in Teotila, which is way up in the mountains in Oaxaca. It's about 200 miles south of Mexico City. And he took up that job in 1673. It's a mining post. And he served there until 1679. And what he found was that he was quite good as being an administrator in the mining area. And it appears that he decided that maybe he would, in fact, make his fortune in the Indies. Now, this place, Teotila, is way up in the mountains of Oaxaca, and if you go just over the mountains and down, you'll go to Guatemala. So we assume that probably at some point in his service there, he went there, and he probably also brought back with him his half-siblings, or at least the boys. He learned that his wife Beatriz had died on the 10th of July of 1674 at the age of 32 while he was serving in the Indies. He was then posted to Tlalpujahua, which is in Michoacan. It's about 100 miles northwest of Mexico City. It's another mining area, and he proved to be even more effective as an administrator there. At some point while he was serving there, he was obviously moving back and forth between Tlalpujahua and Mexico City, because there was a development in his personal life that he didn't mention in any correspondence to Spain. At a little house on the Plazuela de las Gallas, which is several blocks from south of the Zocalo in Mexico City, it's not there anymore. You can see it on the old maps, but it's been a building has been placed there. He had a little family. By 1679 or 1680, he was living with a woman in Mexico City, and we believe that she was Nicolasa Rincon. That's all we only know her name to be that because her son, when she passed away, her son indicated that his mother had died on such and such a day in a certain parish, and in the parish records there's only one individual who died on that day. So it's not absolutely conclusive that she was in fact the mother, but it seems rather likely that she was. So we concluded from the date of her death that she was Vargas's consort. They had a son, and they named him Juan Manuel. Now you recall when I ran through the list of names that Vargas's youngest son in Spain, who was still living, was also named Juan Manuel. It's not unusual for someone to name more than one child Juan Manuel or anything else if one of those children dies. But it's rather unusual, I think, to find someone who would choose to name two children exactly the same name. And one of the things that it suggests that he was going to keep these families apart, if he could. Also, he had a child named Alonso, after his father, and Maria Teresa. We know that at this time that he was living with this small family, he was supporting his half-brothers, Pedro Alonso and Francisco. Their mother remarried. She did not need a member of the Vargas family. She relocated away from, at the time they were living in Antigua, what's called Antigua today, Santiago de Guatemala. She moved out of town. And so the boys moved in with the family in Mexico City. So Vargas has his half-brothers and his New World family living together in Mexico City. And Pedro Alonso, his half-brother, becomes a student of law at the University of Mexico City, one of the oldest in the Americas. Francisco, sir, is with his father in Tlapujawa. And the half-brothers, meanwhile, in Mexico City, are suing their mother, trying to recover their part of their father's estate. It's also fairly typical. Nothing has really changed. He was named to the governorship of New Mexico in 1688. He didn't get around to taking it up until that year. And that same year, his daughter married well in Spain. She married a man named Ignacio López de Zárate, who was a very influential, very powerful person. He was on one of the king's councils. And sometime after 1675, we don't know precisely when, Vargas's eldest son back in Spain, who's Francisco Ivan, died. Juan Manuel was a page at royal court. Now, Diego de Vargas himself, El Señor Feo, did not have what the Spanish called buenas prendas. He couldn't cut the mustard as a page. He wasn't handsome enough, although I think he looks blind in the photograph. We also know that he had a speech impediment. He had a lisp. Not the Castilian lisp. He lisped and he couldn't pronounce certain words correctly. So pronounced was the lisp that when he came to the New World, it's mentioned as a characteristic in much the same way that a scar would be listed. So he didn't have buenas prendas, but Juan Manuel, his son, did, and he was serving as a page at court. So he would attend the king and the princesses and the princes and that sort of thing. Vargas advised his son, Juan Manuel, to pursue a career in the military, which he did, and he was quite successful. He became a captain of heavy cavalry. And under no circumstances should he join his father in the Indies. And like children will do, Juan Manuel disobeyed his father. Juan Manuel was very unhappy with López de Zárate's management of the estate. He probably would have liked to have managed it himself. So he put everything in hock in order to pay for his journey to the New World. And he was traveling in style. He traveled with 2 servants and all the accoutrements of a young gentleman traveling to the New World. His stated reason was that he wanted to have his father come home. And he wanted to meet his father. He had been just a child when his father had left. One of Diego de Vargas's closest lieutenants, Antonio de Valverde Cosillo, happened to be in Madrid in 1698. And so when he made preparations to return to New Spain the following year, Juan Manuel de Vargas went with him. Now you can imagine the conversation when Antonio de Valverde, knowing what he knows, is telling Juan Manuel, I don't think your father really wants you to come, it's dangerous. But he came, and he arrived in Mexico City, and his father was still en route from New Mexico down. Vargas arrived in Mexico City in the fall of 1700. Juan Manuel went out to meet him. Vargas was a person of renown. He was the reconqueror of New Mexico, and when word arrived that he was coming to Mexico City, Juan Manuel was able to find that out, so he met him outside the city. Vargas was speechless when he saw his son. He'd only seen him as a child, but he saw him as a grown-up. He was struck speechless. It was a very emotional moment. We only know that because of he set it down in his letters. They were together for 19 months, and one imagines interesting family dynamics that must have gone on. When Juan Manuel, while he was waiting for his father, the other Juan Manuel had called on him. Juan Manuel from Spain said, "A young man came to see me. He's about the same size as I am. He looks just like me." His mother offered their home to me, but I refused to meet her. Now, that was before Dad got on the scene. I imagine when Vargas came to his home on Plazuela de las Gallas, probably everybody all got together. The half-brothers, the New World family, Juan Manuel. It was probably one big, interesting family. Juan Manuel was very quickly involved in what was described as a tragic love affair. His paramour died in childbirth. He was not allowed to return to Spain because there were questions of honor swirling around the situation. And then there was war with France, and so there was no fleet to sail on. So he probably had not intended to stay as long as he did. He finally left for Spain in June of 1702. His father provided for him. He put himself in debt so that he could have his son return to Spain in glory. And Vargas's greatest fear was realized in the trip from Veracruz to Havana. Plague broke out on the ship, and Juan Manuel died. And then if that were not enough, the ships burned, probably in a pirate attack, and everything that was being sent back to Spain. Vargas would have been sending back cocoa, cacao, chocolate. He would have been sending back probably items of gold and silver, all the things that he would have wanted his family to have, and they were all destroyed. So, I want to share with you a little bit of Vargas's observation about that event. And he can say it a lot better than I can. And this is in reference to Juan Manuel. He's writing to his son-in-law. "I did not consent to having him come, nor did I imagine in any way that he would trap himself here. Out of esteem and goodwill, a place was made for him, and it might have worked for the best. It never occurred to me that he would not be present in Madrid. He would not be the representative of our ancestors' memory, maintaining the luster of my house, and I myself had bestowed upon it a title of Castile. As a result of the death of my beloved son, it has been necessary for me to make the decision in accordance with the present state of my fortune and the debts I have contracted to recover my losses. I must guard my honor so that it does not wane, and I come to see myself disgraced, lacking what is needed for proper appearances, to keep and support myself for as long as I have to delay in this kingdom. Our Lord has seen fit to take unto himself my beloved son, who was the reason for setting aside this very just consideration. Because of the love I blindly felt for him, I dispossessed myself of everything while still alive. His life was my only life. As the idol of my love, he could not object to what I must do in his absence now that I have returned to my senses. I need to prepare all that is required to remedy my situation and avoid the ruin of dishonor and disrespect, and at the same time that of exposing myself to perpetual captivity, lost in this kingdom, unable to leave, impeded by debt. Therefore, having considered and weighed these questions of honor and the hardship, injury, and irreparable damage, it is well that I open my eyes to the thought of 30 years lost, from the 11th of August, 1672, when I left Spain, my beloved homeland, that delightful villa of Madrid, crown of all the world. I am reflecting on debts in place of payments, on my estates, which might have supported me comfortably during the last days and time with our Lord saw fit to give me. I would have enjoyed my family without having the additional burden of the whole labyrinth and abyss necessary for human life in these parts. Vargas's cup of woe at the death of his son, his beloved son. So Vargas decided to return to New Mexico and departed in the summer of 1703. With him came Juan Manuel, the new world Juan Manuel, age 23, as Vargas's adjutant. Alonso, age 22, also came. And Vargas himself, age 59. He had a premonition of death. And I think I'd like to share a little bit of that with you as well. It is certain that had I received news in that land and kingdom of my son's death, I would have chosen to marry in Spain someone of like temperament and my social equal, though I would not have asked even a yard of ribbon from her. In Spain, the most impeccable nobility is that which has nothing. And of course, he pretty well fell into that category. He fell ill on the 31st of March. He died on the 8th of April at the age of 60, but not before naming Isabel Maria, his daughter in Spain, heir to his title, Marquesa de Navarra de Barcenas in her case, and his New World encomienda, which made her husband the possessor of Vargas's estate, administering it in his wife's name. On his deathbed, he recognized his 3 illegitimate children. He provided for them, and we later learned that he whispered into the ear of one of them, "If you're ever in need, seek recourse to my daughter and her husband in Spain, and they will help you out." A number of questions arise when we talk about Vargas's families, his 2 families. Why did he leave his family in Spain? And I think we have an idea that he, from what I've told you, what I've shared with you, that he went with the idea of settling his father's estate. That was the primary motivation for him leaving. People often ask, why would he leave a young wife and young children? And I think that it's obvious that he never intended to stay permanently. Another question is, why did he not marry in the New World? A reporter, usually before Fiesta, people call and ask questions about Vargas, and a reporter called last week and she asked this question, why did Vargas not marry in the New World? And she said, he seems to me like kind of a jerk. And I said, well, I don't really share that view. I don't believe he was a jerk. My wife had passed away while he was there, and he sought company as people are wont to do. And he later told his son-in-law that he made no pretense. I guess he'd had what we would call today an arrangement with Nicolás Rincón, that he was going to return to Spain and marry someone of his status. We could imagine that she probably was either a Creole or perhaps she was mestizo. We don't really know that much about her. Why did he remain in the Indies? I think it's clear that he remained in the Indies because he found that he was quite successful as an administrator. He saw the opportunity to come to New Mexico as a chance to make his fortune. I'm sure most of you know that in those days, one did not get appointed to a governorship, one purchased a governorship. You know, last year I stood up here and I said that myself, and I thought, wait a minute. Yes, there is still a lot of influence of money, but one purchased positions, and what happened was you purchased futures, like you could purchase hog bellies, you could purchase governorship futures. So you would buy the future of New Mexico, you'd serve that. And see, Vargas, because he was the reconqueror, Vargas asked to be reappointed. The mail moved a little bit more slowly, just a little bit more slowly in those days than it does today. The king said, yeah, that's fine, you can be reappointed, unless your successor has already taken up the job, in which case you'll have to wait until his term is over, and then you can have it. Those of you who have devoured the Vargas volumes will know that his successor, Pedro Rodriguez Cabero, threw him in jail for 3 years before Vargas was allowed to come back. But when Vargas was through in 1692, when Vargas reconquered New Mexico, on what we call the ceremonial reconquest, he went around to all the pueblos and said, hey, I'm back. And, he notified the king, New Mexico's been reconquered. He said, I'd like to go somewhere else now. I'd like to go to Tucumán in Argentina. I'd like to go to the Philippines. I'd like to go to anywhere but here. But he did come back. He did come back, and we know he came back as a point of honor. So, did the family in Spain know of the New World family? Well, initially they didn't. And it seems clear that for whatever his reasons were, he was trying to keep those families separate. You know, I've often wondered why he chose to name his son Juan Manuel, and you know, maybe it was just less confusing to, you know. But for whatever reason. Now, I want to say, sort of as an epilogue, Vargas's two New World sons would leave the Spanish family alone for a while. They left New Mexico. They were escorted by one of his lieutenants back to their mother, and she remained alive until 1706. And that's when one of the sons writes to Spain, to Vargas' son-in-law, and says, my mother has died, we're in difficulty here, can you please help us out? So we certainly know at that point that the family learned that there was a New World family. Now, I have a feeling that in the 19 months that when Juan Manuel from Spain was visiting Dad, he probably had occasion to write back and say, guess what I found? But we don't have that letter, and so we don't know for sure. The fate of Vargas's Spanish-born Juan Manuel is known. We don't know the fate of the New World. We also know that in that little bit of difficulty that Juan Manuel from Spain got into, from that difficulty was produced a child. And Vargas found out about that after his son was dead, that when someone approached him and said, would you please pay for the funeral of your son's lover? She's died in childbirth, and here's the baby. And Vargas says, I don't know if this is Juan Manuel's son, but it looks just like me. Vargas's half-brothers Pedro Alonso successfully completed his legal studies and became a lawyer in Mexico City and continued to represent the Spanish family in Mexican affairs for many years, and he died sometime before 1717. Francisco, the other half-brother, was alcalde mayor in the province of Coatzacoalcos in the state of Veracruz. He settled in Puebla, and from there he wrote frequently to Isabel Maria, Vargas's daughter in Spain, discussing aspects of the encomienda. And one of the things that he suggested to her was that she try not to have it imposed on the Pueblo Indians, that he didn't think that would be appropriate. And finally, we occasionally hear from, I occasionally hear from what I guess I would describe as putative descendants of one of these men. People occasionally contact me and say, I'm related to Vargas's New World family, or I'm related to Vargas's half-brothers. Many years ago, I was contacted by a Jesuit priest, so I rather suspect he knows what he's talking about. And he said that he was related to Vargas. Vargas still doesn't have a biography, and Vargas doesn't have a biographer either. I spent almost 20 years working on Vargas, and I've left him alone for a long time. And the other day at lunch with Fran, she suggested that maybe it was time to consider writing a biography of him. So for the last little while, I've been trying to find information in the archives of Guatemala that are available online about trying to plug in that final gap in the story. So if the interest in Vargas continues, as I'm sure it will with you folks, maybe there'll be sometime in the future when I can come talk to you again about having unraveled the knot of Vargas and his family in Guatemala. That's what I have for you right now. I'd be happy to take questions for a few minutes, maybe 15 minutes or so if you have them.